Today, let's discuss what to do if your GMAT score is not going up. Obviously, this is a super disconcerting situation, especially if you've been studying for a long time or you're putting in a lot of study hours. And there can be quite a few reasons why you might be studying and the score might not be moving. So let's get through all of the most common ones that I've seen and make sure that you've got a great fix for each one. One of the main reasons that scores don't improve is timing trouble. And for most people, there's a significant amount of time pressure in the section. And this might sound obvious, but it's worth saying. If you know all the content on the exam, but you don't have time to get credit for all that knowledge, then all the knowledge you've built probably won't show up in the score. So let's just go through a simple no-fail way to improve your speed if this is an issue for you. And just FYI, we've got an entire podcast on how to improve your speed on GMAT questions, and we'll link that in the description of this content. If you're struggling with pacing, what I would recommend is creating a 10 question set of problems for the type of question that you're having time trouble with. For example, you might be struggling with critical reasoning timing, or you might be struggling with reading comprehension timing, or it might be any of the other problem types in the exam. Now, if you're struggling with timing in the whole verbal section, let's say, then I would recommend starting with either critical reasoning or reading comp, whichever one seems to be the more difficult challenge, working on that first, improving your timing on that one question type, and then moving to the other question type. Just using verbal as an example. But if you were struggling with DI timing, I would recommend starting with multi-source reasoning and then moving to graphs and then moving to tables, etc., just based on what you're seeing in your practice exam data. Now, if your provider doesn't have these kinds of question banks where you can isolate like a bunch of critical reasoning questions to work on 10 question sets, then you can use a free website called GMAT Club. It's just gmatclub.com. And you can click on forum from the homepage, and then there'll be a link that says GMAT on the next page near the top. And then there'll be a menu that drops down, and you'll be able to choose something called question banks. Now, you'll need an account. It's free to make an account in order to access those, but that's probably the simplest and free way to make these kinds of sets that I'm about to talk you through. Having said that, there are many providers who have questions, and you can certainly use the MBA.com question set builder that comes with your official guides if you have access to that and you haven't done all those questions yet. But the idea is you just need a platform to help you create these 10 question sets. What I'd recommend is starting with the easiest difficulty level. Now, that might be too easy for you, but you need to data validate that. So I would recommend beginning there. And at the worst, it's one set of 10 easy questions that you'll probably finish relatively quickly. And then that way you can be sure that those easy questions are not a problem for you in terms of timing. What you want to do is just use a count up timer. So no time pressure and no time limit on the sets. I know that might sound crazy right now, but if what you've been doing has not been working, I'm just going to invite you to try something different. And this is something I've seen work basically 100% of the time. So complete all 10 questions with the count up timer and then look at your total time for the set. Then on your next set, you want to compete with the previous set's total time. And what your goal should be is just be at least 1 second faster than you were on the previous 10 question set. So the idea is not to compete with an arbitrary clock number like you will on the actual exam, but to compete with where you are personally starting. This is, in my experience, a much more effective way to build your speed because speed usually doesn't just happen overnight as much as we might like it to. And when we launched the TGS fast pill where you can just take a pill and immediately be fast, then all of you will be the first to know about that. But that does not exist right now. And so this is the next best thing. And what you want to do is just continue to compete with your previous set's time until you get into the timing range that you'll need on the official exam. And for most of you, that's going to be just over 2 minutes per question if you have regulation time. If you have extended time accommodations, then obviously you're going to have more time and you hopefully are capable of doing that math. But if you're not sure what that math should look like, just reach out to us anytime and we will help you figure that out. Feel free to click on the link below and you'll find all our contact information at the bottom of that series of links. Okay, then what you want to do once you get into your target time with the easiest difficulty range is just bump up the difficulty level until you are completing questions at your desired score level with the allotted time. So for example, if we're using the GMAT Club platform, then you'll start with sub 505. That's the lowest difficulty category you can filter for. Let's say we're working on critical reasoning. You'd do 10 critical reasoning from that difficulty range. Let's say that the total time to finish the set is 30 minutes. So it's about 2.5 minutes a question. You want to get down to about 2 minutes. I think it's 2.1 minutes. Let's call it just around 2 minutes to hit your target time in the section, because in verbal, you have 45 minutes for 23 questions, which is just under 2 minutes per question. Now, keep in mind, you might be a little bit faster on reading comp, so your target time for critical reasoning doesn't necessarily need to be 1.95 minutes per question or whatever 45 divided by 23 is. But you want to be in an acceptable range for where you are at. And if you're also struggling with reading comp timing, like you're particularly slow on reading comp, then you really want to hit that 2 minute range or better before you move on to the next difficulty range. So let's say you go through 10 question sets of that sub 505 difficulty range. And eventually over the course of those 10 question sets, or about 50 problems total, you figure out what you need to do to get faster at that sub 505 level. Now, quick point. I see a lot of people say like, oh, I'm just going to do 50 questions in a row. Don't do that. Don't do that. Please take my advice the way that I'm giving it to you, because I promise there are many, many reasons that I'm breaking it down like this. Now, I'm not talking to you about all those whys behind the reasons. Otherwise, this would be like a 300-hour podcast, okay? But just trust me that you're going to want that faster feedback loop of 10 question sets so that you can review that 10 question set, figure out what needs to happen before the next 10 question set, rather than doing 50 questions in a row with the wrong habits and then only iterating and changing your approach after 50 questions. That's going to be super inefficient. So you don't want that. Break it into 10 question sets. Okay, let's say we've done 5 of those. We're now in the target range for sub 505 difficulty. Now we would move up to the 505 to 555 difficulty range, and we would do a 10 question set. We would note our total time, and then we would try on the next 10 question set from 505 to 555 difficulty level to beat the previous set's time. And we just repeat that process of competing with our previous set's time until we are in the target time range. And then we would bump it up to the next difficulty level and repeat that process. So hopefully that's clear. Definitely reach out to us if you're not sure what I'm talking about or how to apply it to your specific situation. This can be a big project, and getting discouraged with it is totally allowed. Failing to beat your previous set's time is totally allowed. All of those negative emotions kind of make sense if you think about it. Like, this is an important thing you're working on. You've probably attached a lot of your personal self-worth to these numbers on the screen that are associated with this exam. That's completely natural for people like us. And it's not even necessarily a bad thing. It's just understanding that some days are going to be great, some days are going to be bad. And that emotional roller coaster might be a sign that you're on the right path and that you're pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. And that's why it's uncomfortable. Now, of course, if you're feeling really, really bad, then it's probably time to get some professional help so you can feel better. None of this is medical or psychiatric advice. I want to be clear about that. But within reason, this is a very difficult challenge, and you should expect that it will feel difficult. And most of us don't naturally have really great emotions when we're feeling like something that we want to happen yesterday is going to take 3 months. Like that's not the time that most humans are like, yeah, I'm so happy this is taking 10 times longer than I want it to. Like that would be very unusual. Having said that, you don't need to worry about the discouragement that comes with that. It's a completely natural part of the process. You just need to focus on what you need to do to improve. That's the key. Just keep refocusing. If you get distracted by how frustrated you are, that's totally natural. Other people are feeling frustrated too. Other people are struggling, whether you read about it online or not. And the struggle is not really the important part of the process. The important part of the process is how you're going to get better. So just constantly refocus on that, and don't let the negative emotions knock you out of the game, if that makes sense. So the key here is just to keep challenging yourself to come up with new ways to improve your speed without sacrificing accuracy. Some of those experiments and hypotheses that you come up with are going to work. and you'll have a breakthrough. Some of them are not going to work, and that will naturally lead you to the next hypothesis. And if you're studying completely on your own and you're committed to doing that and you're committing to do it for free, you just keep running those experiments until you figure out your unique success system. Obviously, if you want help, there's lots of people in the space who can help you accelerate that progress. Um, Now, if you are going to try to do it on your own, I'd strongly recommend listening to the How to Get Faster at GMAT Focus Questions episode. It's in the audio feed and the video feed, depending on how you like to consume this content. And we will link that episode below for you as well. If you can afford it, I strongly recommend getting a coach. Obviously, all of us are going to, well, maybe not all of us, but many of us are going to be in different financial situations and have different capital constraints. Uh, just in case this isn't painfully obvious, having a professional there to give you insights on how to improve your timing is super valuable and can save you a lot of time versus trying to figure it out on your own. But that situation's not for everybody. I'm not saying everybody should get a coach. I'm just saying consider it if you have the capital to invest. It can save you a lot of time. That's probably the number one reason that people's scores don't go up is timing trouble, but not necessarily. There's going to be a little bit of bleed between these categories. But the next huge reason that scores don't go up is missing questions that you know how to do. This is a huge issue, much more pervasive than you might think. And part of the reason it's so pervasive is it's very tempting when you miss questions you know how to do to just like sweep that problem under the rug. And if you're not familiar with that expression, it means like you kind of just brush it off and tell yourself that it's not a problem, but it is a huge problem. It is a huge problem. It would be like running a business where your costs are ballooning out of control and you're like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. It's like, that's a pretty big deal. Like you're just losing money or like your employees are stealing and you're just like, oh, we're not going to worry about that. So let's talk about the number one kind of like simplest fail-safe way to stop missing questions you know how to do. The first step in resolving this is to actually keep a record of these types of misses. Don't just say to yourself, well, I just won't do that again. Don't do that. If you find yourself doing that, that's the immediate trigger for you to pull out your list of all the times that you've made these mistakes and make a new entry in it. This doesn't have to be a complicated list, but you should absolutely be stopping the study session every time that this happens. Every time that you miss a question that you knew how to do, you want to make an entry in this list. And you want that to happen for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is simply to stop yourself from the very natural habit of being like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. That's not going to happen again. That was just a one-off thing. That's very unlikely to work. I have not seen that work ever. I have never ever seen someone just say like, oh, I just won't make that mistake again, and then they don't make the mistake again. Those mistakes usually happen because of subconscious habits. Think about it this way. Did you go into the set with the intention to miss that question you knew how to do? So is making just a new intention of like, oh, I just won't do that again, likely to fix that problem? Probably not. It doesn't have anything to do with your intentions. It has to do with your habits. It has to do with what you've conditioned yourself to do under pressure. Okay, so that's why you need this list. If you try to delay that discomfort of stopping the session and making the entry and just again sweep it under the rug, you won't have the motivation to make the necessary changes in your behavior to an extent. I hate to say it this way, but it's true. To an extent, it's the pain of having to stop and make the entry log and kind of like confront your own embarrassment with yourself that you missed that question for that reason. That is a really powerful motivator to change. And if you are not fully confronting that discomfort, then you're probably your own worst enemy in that situation. It's kind of like the quote unquote friend who's just telling you like, oh, you don't have to change all these, bad habits and the fact that you're addicted to this and the fact that you're eating poorly and the fact that you're not doing what you need to do to sleep well and the fact that you're in these toxic relationships. Like just chill on that. Just, have this next drink and don't worry about it. It's like that person's not your friend. Sorry. So you don't want to be that kind of friend to yourself. That's the point I want to make, just to drive that home. You want to be the kind of friend to yourself in this situation who's like, hey, listen, we all make mistakes. We all backslide. We all get addicted to things that we shouldn't be addicted to. We all get into relationships that we shouldn't be in. Let me just level with you. I'm sorry if this is uncomfortable. I obviously I want to have good vibes in our relationship 100% of the time, but like I really just feel like I'm not being a good friend to you unless I tell you, like, have you thought about this? You should probably fix this. Maybe you shouldn't be going to this place that serves this thing that you're addicted to all the time. Have you thought about that? Can I support you? You know, you want to be that friend to yourself, if that makes sense. You don't have to be a jerk to yourself. But you can't be sweeping these things under the rug with yourself, because if you are, you're going to sweep things under the rug with your team when you eventually are a leader, and or as you are a leader right now, which is extremely common and a very, very fast path to failure in the business world. It's uncomfortable. It's why a lot of people just aren't cut out for leadership, or just they don't pursue leadership because they haven't developed this skill of confronting their own discomfort with themselves, if that makes sense. Um, so this concept of missing questions that you know how to do is a great opportunity to build that habit and that skill, because it is a skill. It's like a muscle. You know, if you're not used to using it, it's not going to go super smoothly the first few times, but that's okay. You just got to start weak and then build up to being super strong with it. And pretty much every leader I know who's great with this did that process. They just kept doing it until it became more natural for them. So if you simply keep this list and make that log every time you make one of these mistakes, and then you look at that list at least once per week and figure out the biggest reason that you've been missing questions you know how to do. Like, just look at all the entries you've made and figure out the one that's coming up the most. And then simply think about what you can do to prevent that from ever happening again, and write that behavior down and do that behavior on every question for the next week. You will eventually stop missing questions that you know how to do. Again, let me just rehash this. Very simple process. Have a list where you write down what the mistake is that you make every time you miss a question you know how to do. Look at that at least once per week. Think about which one is happening the most. Think about a behavior to keep that from happening. Write that new behavior down and have that new behavior out on the desk for the next week. And just keep doing that until you've built all those new behaviors that are going to stop you from missing questions you know how to do. It's not that this is a complicated process. It's just that most people have so much emotional resistance to it that they just refuse to confront it. And a lot of times it's not even conscious. Like, just keep your eye on it. I'm not saying you're doing this, but just keep your eye on it. Watch when you give yourself excuses and let yourself off the hook for bad behavior. Just keep your eye on it. It can be a little weird when you start noticing it happening, and it's almost like you have to be like a parent to this like childlike version or like part of yourself. I'm not saying all of you are childlike or that I'm childlike 100% of the time, but I have childlike parts of myself. I don't know enough about human psychology to understand like why that happens, but it's like sometimes I have to parent those parts of me. And again, the way I think about it is like just being a good friend to myself. Like, what would I want my ideal friend to say to me if he or she saw me doing this behavior right now? Like, hey man, are you sure you should be doing that? That's just how it occurs for me. But you have to, I won't say you have to, but I would encourage you to find the right language and the right way of being that good friend to yourself. Because the more you can lead yourself toward the right habits and down the right path, the better and more skillful and more natural it'll be to lead others down that path, which ultimately is the goal for most of us as we are moving along this process of getting an MBA. Now, of course, there's also the obvious benefit of you'll stop missing questions you know how to do and your score will go up. And like I said, with the timing piece, if you know all the content, but you don't have time to get credit for it, then learning more content won't move your score. Same thing with missing questions you know how to do. If you're missing a lot of questions you know how to do and you're constantly just sweeping it under the rug and making excuses for yourself as to why you won't do that in the future, but not really conditioning yourself to do something different so that it's definitely avoided in the future, then learning more content probably won't show up in your score either, because you're not getting credit for the content you already know. And learning more content is not a solution to that problem. So that's why I'm leading with those two things. Those are the major reasons people's scores are not going up. Now, let's say that you've either are not having timing issues, or you've resolved them, or you are not missing questions you know how to do, or you are steadily resolving missing questions you know how to do. Then the third thing to look at is you don't know the material well enough. Uh, this is often not the situation for a lot of people, as you might imagine, because most of you have been very skilled for a long time with learning material. That's how you've done well on tests and gotten to this point in your academic and professional career. But let's just quickly touch on what to do if you realize like, oh shoot, I just don't know probability well enough. I should fix that. Or like, I'm just not good enough at strengthen the argument CR. It's not a timing issue. I'm not missing the questions I know how to do. I just straight up don't know how to do these hard questions. Um, So this doesn't mean you need to know everything. It just means you don't know things well enough yet, and that can be addressed. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure you really understand all the core material that you've covered on this particular subject. And again, I'd recommend breaking it down by major problem type first. Problem solving is the only problem type in quant. Critical reasoning and reading comp are the two main problem types in verbal. And then you've got multi-source reasoning, two-part analysis, graphs, and tables in data insights section. And then you've got data sufficiency in the data insights section. So those are the major problem types. Start with those as categories, and then you can further refine them as you get more data. Like, oh, it's strengthen the argument CR, or it's probability quant questions, that kind of thing. So what I'm recommending here as the first step is, if you've taken a course, review the just core material, like the lessons from that course on that subject. And if you haven't taken a course, then you can find some free information online just by searching for probability GMAT quant question lesson or something like that. And then go through that material 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times if needed until you could teach the lesson on it. That's the level that you're going for here for these quote unquote weakness areas in content. You want to film yourself or record yourself just using your phone or your computer, teaching the lesson, and then play it back and be like, if I didn't know about this, would I understand all of it based on the lesson I just taught? Because this is kind of a weird lesson of leadership that I've learned, which is if you can't teach it, you probably don't know it well enough. It's kind of weird. Again, it gets into this like unintentional dishonesty with ourselves that can just happen as a human being. It doesn't mean we're like bad people. I think it's just kind of a natural thing to sweep things under the rug and be like, oh, that's not that big a deal. I don't know why that is. Maybe someone can enlighten me. But this happens a lot with the content piece as well, of like, oh, I studied that lesson 3 times, so I probably know it. It's like, well, like, have you proven that to yourself? Have you proven by teaching a lesson on it that somebody else would understand? That's what you want to do. Again, it goes back to being that friend to yourself of like, well, if you know it so well, why are you struggling with it on the test, man? Like that's kind of an uncomfortable question to ask someone who's like coming to you in this vulnerable state. Like, try to support yourself emotionally. And if you're not sure how to do that, listen to the How to Support Someone Studying for the GMAT episode. We'll link that in the description of this content as well. Um, but again, you want to be supportive but firm with yourself and be like, you know what? Maybe I don't know this as well as I am telling myself I do. Maybe I need to really dig in here. Okay. And the bar is high, everybody. Like, if you think about the what's at stake here with the whole MBA situation, like, imagine I came to you and I was like, hey, give me, a couple $100,000, and I will make sure that you make an extra $100,000 or more a year, every year for the entire rest of your career. And you really believed that I could deliver for you, like the data was there. Would you take that deal? Most people would. Most people would take that deal. And that's kind of the deal that's on the table with business school. Now, obviously, I'm super reducing it to just money, and like people's different numbers are going to be different. And it depends on what school you go to and what industry you're in. And not everybody's all about the cash, and neither am I. I'm not saying money's everything. It's just a convenient, easy scorecard to make a point during this lesson. That's why I'm saying it that way. But like, you could do your own math there. Like, think about it for your situation. Actually run the numbers on like, what is the ROI on B school? And be like, okay, it's probably worth just pushing myself a little bit to get that kind of deal. The other thing to think about, and the reason I brought it up in the first place, is would it be reasonable for that deal to require like no effort on your part to fulfill on? It would not really be reasonable, because virtually anybody would take that deal. And so there's a lot of people willing to work really, really hard to get those limited opportunities. And that's why it's competitive. It's competitive just because it's a really valuable opportunity. And so a lot of people are willing to put a lot of effort in to be like, yeah, I will totally work my buns off and like be really honest with myself so that I can have the status and prestige and optionality and lifestyle choices. I mean, whatever you value, it's you don't necessarily need to be the person who values status or prestige, but maybe you are the person who values status or prestige. That's cool. Maybe you're the person who's all about the cash. Maybe you're not the person who's all about that. Maybe you're all about impact. But whatever, it's a trade where you're willing to invest a little bit to get a lot later. And so it's reasonable to expect that that's going to require a lot of energy. It's just the way things work. There's basically no such thing as something for nothing. It usually doesn't work that way. So back to how to build your content knowledge. Um, Again, go through the course material that you've been through. work through that material enough so that you believe you know everything, and then record yourself teaching it so that you can be sure that you do indeed actually know it well enough. Once you can record that lesson and listen back and be like, okay, that's good. I would understand that. I get this now. If I didn't know anything about this, I would now know stuff about it. Then you want to get sets of questions on specific topics. I already talked to you about how to do that using GMAT Club for free, but you might be working with a provider that also has question banks. That's great too. You can do whatever you're comfortable with and reach out to us if you're not sure how to get those question specific topics. But what you want to do is you want to pick the top 3 topics that you believe are holding your score back the most. You don't want to spread yourself too thin by trying to improve your content knowledge on every single topic all at the same time. 3 is the absolute maximum. Sometimes it's even better to just do one topic at a time. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take these question banks and you're going to do questions one at a time. You're not going to do sets. Okay. We're not trying to improve timing here. We're trying to improve knowledge. It's a totally different thing that we're trying to grow. And you really don't want to do it as a set because, first of all, it's totally unrealistic that you're going to see 10 questions in a row on critical reasoning, strengthen the argument questions. That's basically never going to happen on a real test. So why would you practice that way? It's totally unrealistic practice. And second of all, if you're doing something wrong or there's a content area that you need to improve, you want to fix that before you condition yourself to do it wrong on 9 more problems. Okay, so that's why you're going to do just one problem at a time. If you're practicing time, you're doing sets of 10 at a time. If you're practicing content, you're doing one question at a time, reviewing that question, making sure you make any requisite adjustments, and then doing the next question after that. You want the shortest feedback loop when it comes to content, which is one question feedback loops. That's it. That's it. If you need to make study sheets or flashcards to help you learn the material so that you can teach it better, by all means do that. I've got plenty of advice on how to do that in the how to structure your study time podcast/video, which will be linked in the description of this particular episode as well. So reach out to us if you're not sure how to grow your content knowledge. But again, just to summarize, because I kind of went off on the mindset thing there for a sec, you want to make sure you really understand the material on a specific question type, like critical reasoning, reading comp, or quant. You want to go back through the material that you've used to learn, whether that be a paid program or free material you've gone through. If you haven't learned anything on that topic, then you want to search some lessons or get a program or a coach to help you learn that material. Then you want to go through that material over and over and over again, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times if needed, until you can teach a lesson that someone who has not studied for the exam would understand. Once you've done that, you get sets of questions. You filter only for that specific topic, and then you do one question at a time until you are hitting the requisite accuracy numbers you want to see and the requisite times that you want to see. Quick accuracy number to know you're quote unquote good enough would be 80%. That's a good threshold. Probably could hit a high score if you can hit 80% in every content area across all difficulty levels. And then around 2 minutes per question based on the other question types in that section and how you're performing on those. Those are good metrics. So again, reach out to us if you have any questions about that. Now, the next place that holds people's scores back from going up, other than timing, missing questions they know how to do, and not knowing the material well enough, is that you are getting really stressed during the exam, and that's affecting your ability to perform like you can perform in practice. Like it's a little different vibe to perform well with timing and content knowledge and not missing questions you know how to do with a 10 question set than it is with like a real practice test or an official exam for that matter. This is a deep topic, the whole like stress and test anxiety thing. I'm going to try to stay away from the test anxiety nomenclature specifically because I think that describes a very specific, narrow situation where you're having like physical manifestations of stress. Some people disagree with me, and that's cool. I'm not going to comment on that. But this is just the way I define it. And you're going to hear people use that term sometimes narrowly, sometimes loosely. I use it very narrowly. And then I would just use like exam stress to talk about something that's not like a physical stress condition. It's more psychological stress. That's what I would call about like exam stress. I would describe it that way. Whereas test anxiety, it's like you got like the sweaty palms going, like physical symptoms, if that makes sense. That's just how I define it. There's no right or wrong there. I just want to be clear about what I'm discussing here. Again, deep topic, but at the end of the day, here's the kind of like short, simplest, one single piece of advice, no fail approach. First off, start by reading a book called Performing Under Pressure. That's the title of the book by Weisinger and Fry. Fry, Fry, is the easiest author name to spell. So if you type that into a web search, you should find some good result. It's written by people who have their MBA, which is cool. They use a lot of relevant business examples. The book was written a little while ago, so some of the examples are a bit dated. But I have found with many, many, many of my clients at this point who struggle with test-related stress and test anxiety, that this is a great place to start. It might not be a revelation on every page as you read the book, but odds are there's at least one or two gold nuggets in there that can make a significant positive difference for you. It might not solve the whole problem, but it'll be a good place to start. And for many of my past clients, it has solved the entire stress problem and their score goes to where they want it to be. And like, it's all good. And not a difficult read. So that's step one. Step two would be get professional help if you need it. This is an investment. It'll definitely pay off for the rest of your career. If all you need is a few sessions with someone who can help you handle the pressure and stress better, that's going to be more than worth it in 99.9% of cases. Again, this is not medical or psychiatric advice. This is just my opinion that I am recommending to you. Start with the book. If that's not enough, get some professional help. It'll be more than worth it in the short term and the long term. And this is what I've seen over, let's call it like 1,000 data points of people on the low side, probably more like 5,000 of people I've worked with who have had these stress and anxiety issues. Use your network to get a personal reference if you can for this, if you're going to get the professional help route. If that doesn't work, like you don't know anybody who can recommend someone, then do some initial consultations after a web search with people, and then pick someone who you think can help you put in the time. It's definitely an unfortunate problem for sure. No one wants to deal with that. But the key is recognizing it's a problem like any other problem, which is there is a solution if you work on it properly and you're willing to go through a couple things that don't work until you finally get a solution that does work. That's, I think, the right attitude to have about that. Again, going back to the emotions thing, like it's totally natural to feel discouraged or upset or frustrated that you're in that situation or that you have the kind of body that reacts a certain way to certain situations. Like those emotions are totally natural. And I wouldn't feel bad about feeling bad about it, if that makes sense. At the same time, you want to focus the vast majority of your energy not on like dwelling on the fact that that's a negative vibe, but instead focusing your energy on being solution oriented to the maximum extent that you can, understanding that, yeah, you're going to get distracted, you're going to get discouraged. Like it's a hard thing to do. Hard things require hard feelings. I mean, it really is that simple. And again, if you're feeling bad about it, that's not necessarily a sign that you're on the wrong path. It might be a sign that you're challenging yourself to the extent that you need to level up here. So just something to consider. Again, reach out to us if you're not sure how to handle test related stress or test anxiety specific situations, and we'll do our absolute best to help you out. After timing, missing questions you know how to do, not knowing the material well enough, and just being way too stressed or having physical anxiety symptoms during the exam, the next most common reason that scores don't improve is that your study time isn't consistent enough, or you're just not putting in enough study time. This usually is not the case. Most people who I interact with on a regular basis who are working on the exam and want to go to a great business school usually don't struggle from motivation issues. But there is a lot of people who do. There are a lot of people, like at least 20%, or maybe about 20% of the population, give or take. But pretty much everybody struggles with motivation issues sometimes. I'm just talking about like, huge, huge issues that are like seriously holding you back. But here's the thing, just kind of like, again, trying to keep this as simple and punchy as possible. You probably know if you're putting your best effort into this or not. If you're not sure what your best effort is, or you feel that that's an ill-defined way of measuring your effort, then work until you would normally stop or tell yourself it's time to stop, and then do 10 to 20% more of what you just did. Doing 10 to 20% more than your believed maximum is where you will figure out what your best effort is. Because you'll often realize that your limit that you are placing on yourself is mostly mental, and you're actually more than capable of doing that extra 10 to 20% that you weren't sure or you were telling yourself you couldn't do. So that's my first recommendation. But that's not always the case. If you're experiencing physical symptoms like physical pain or like, again, physical symptoms of stressing yourself out or overworking yourself, like stomach pain or headaches or like trouble sleeping, that kind of thing, then back off your effort and accept that we all have physical limits. Again, this is not medical or psychiatric advice. I'm just telling you my opinion. We all have physical limits. Can those physical limits be grown over time by doing that 10 to 20% more activity I was just telling you about? Yes. Obviously, that's true. Otherwise, people couldn't get stronger or like couldn't work out and get positive results. And a lot of times our minds and our emotions work the same way. If we just push ourselves a little bit more, then we find we have that extra capacity, but not always. Not always. Okay. So once you kind of hit that limit where you're like, okay, I'm having physical symptoms, like that's the limit. I'm going to back it off. And that's kind of my quote unquote best. That's the maximum amount of time I can put in or the maximum amount of consistency I can create in my time. Then you should just again be satisfied with that. We all have physical limits in terms of how much time and energy we can invest in this. And you want to find what that limit is for yourself, because if you don't go to that limit, you'll always feel unsatisfied with the amount of effort that you're putting in, and you'll always know deep down that you could have done better. And that's going to really eat away at your fulfillment. Even if you have the external success, like fulfillment at the end of the day is what most of us are chasing, not the external success. The external success is just a proxy for fulfillment. I'm not saying that's true 100% of the time. It's just what I've found in 80% of cases, let's say. So that giving your best effort thing will absolutely check the fulfillment box. And simultaneously is also your best means of validating that you're putting in the requisite effort and you're maxing out your personal physical abilities. And everybody's going to have, not everybody, but most of us are going to have different physical abilities when it comes to what we can invest in this. Some of us are studying full time. Some of us are working 100 hours a week and we're studying 2 hours a week. Just do the best that you possibly can and let that add up over time. You'll get there. So once you believe you're investing the greatest total hours you can without damaging your other more important commitments, such as performance at work is slipping, we can't have that happening. Damaging your personal relationships, we can't have that happening. Those we will put in the bucket of physical symptoms where you need to back off and do less study. And then obviously, like your physical health cannot suffer through this process. Sacrificing health to become more successful is not a trade-off that any of us should ever make, in my opinion. And virtually all successful people will tell you that as well. Then what you can do is you can look at how you're investing your study time. Now, if you need more advice about how to level up on the like discipline and consistency and making the time front, like you're trying to push yourself to do 10 to 20% more, or you're telling yourself you're going to study an hour tonight, and then you constantly like don't do that, and you're constantly breaking those commitments with yourself, then check out the how to be more disciplined with your studies episode and how to score high consistently episodes, which we will also link in the description of this episode. Okay. So once you have satisfied yourself that you could not put in any more study time without damaging your other important commitments and incurring these physical costs, like I was talking about, then the next biggest issue is that your study time is not being spent on the right things. Okay. Now, if you're not putting enough study time in, or you're having time trouble, or you're having stress during the exam that's holding your performance back, then spending your study time on the right things is not really going to move the needle. And that's why I'm going in this hierarchy. So hopefully that makes sense. But if you've resolved all the things we just talked about, then you need to make sure that you're spending your study time on the actual right stuff. Now, the biggest issue that people confront with this is they're just doing lots of questions and hoping for the best. It's very, very common to do that because that's often worked for you in the past. And it does work on other exams. And it's just good to recognize that the GMAT is very different from other exams. And if it wasn't, then there would be no like major industry around GMAT prep, because people would just study a lot and do well. And it would be like that simple. But you may be the person who's in this situation. You may have put hundreds of hours into this and not seen your score go up. That's part of the reason I'm making this episode for you. And by the way, that was the situation I was in many years ago when I was studying. I put in thousands of hours and saw my score go down. So imagine how that felt. And that's when I finally accepted the GMAT's different and started this initiative for all of us, because that shouldn't be happening, in my opinion, which is why I'm doing this for you right now. So, once you accept the GMAT's different and it's going to require a different study process than the brute force approach, it's probably not going to work. It works in maybe 1% of cases. Okay. So if that's you, cool. Keep brute forcing it if you're getting results. But this specific episode is for people who are not getting results. So hopefully that's obvious, but it's worth stating. Then let's make the requisite way of spending your study time as simple as we possibly can. Okay. For quant, you want to resolve 3 questions that you've done in the past every time you study. And the list that you want to keep is questions that took you longer than you wanted them to, or that you didn't have a good strategy on. Just Every time you do a quant question that took you longer than you wanted it to, or you didn't have a good strategy on, make an entry in a very simple list and just say, like, here's what I want to remember next time I see this, and then resolve 3 questions from that list every day. If you can afford to solve more because you have more time, great, do that. But I wouldn't spend more than 20% of your total study time solving questions you've already seen. Okay. So make sure you can execute the process perfectly as you resolve those questions. That's the simplest no fail approach on the quant side. With verbal, after every question you do, you want to physically write out why each right answer is right and why each wrong answer is wrong. If you can't explain that, then you haven't reviewed that question enough and you haven't learned enough from that question. Okay, so a lot of you are just spamming a bunch of questions without doing any of the review I just talked about. And that's part of the reason your score is not going up if your score is not going up. So if that's you, then you need to keep a list of questions that you didn't have a strategy on or that took you too long in quant and resolve at least 3 every time you study. And then in verbal, you need to make sure you're writing down why each right answer is right and why each wrong answer is wrong after each question. There's so much more we could talk about in terms of reviewing questions well and having a deep strategy for spending your time properly. But if you want the like quick start, simplest, can't fail approach, implement it today and it'll work over time, that's it. If you want specific review strategies for each question type, that's a lot more in depth, then check out the Quant for GMAT Focus, Verbal for GMAT Focus, and DI for GMAT Focused episodes that we published, I think, in February or March of 2024. Those will help a lot. Okay, final 2 issues here to discuss. The next biggest issue I see people confronting is they're taking too many practice exams. This is kind of similar to what I was just talking about of doing too many practice problems without enough review. So if this is you, just like, oh, I'll just take 5 practice exams in 5 days and like everything will work out great. But you're not necessarily learning enough from each one of those practice tests before the next exam, and your score is not moving as a result, then here's what I'd recommend doing. Now, quick caveat, if you're taking 5 practice exams in 5 days and your score is going up every time and you're seeing results, great. This episode is not for you. All right. But if you're not seeing the results you want, then stop taking so many practice exams. This is a major issue because it's tempting to think that just taking practice exams makes you better. It's similar to the default assumption of like, well, just doing practice problems should make me better, right? That's not necessarily true, but it seems to make sense on the surface, and it's true to a very small degree. And so that's why it's like a pervasive issue, if that makes sense. It seems logical on the surface. Okay, but here's the way to adjust your thinking if you're not having success with that. Practice tests measure your skills. They don't increase your skills. Think about it that way. They are a measurement tool, not a skill increasing tool. It's kind of like working out. You don't get stronger during the workout. During the workout, you're stressing your body, and then it's during your rest time that you build up that additional resilience. That's like taking practice tests. Practice tests are you're measuring your skills, and then it's during your review of that practice test and your work on individual skills that you actually improve the skills that would move the score on the next practice test. All right. So with practice exams, your review process and your targeted study based on that review is what creates the improvement. So here's how to do this in like the quickest, simplest way, and then check out the other episodes linked below if you want more specific advice on this, because it is a deep topic, but I want to give you kind of just the high level, punchy, one-shot deal. Focus on finding the top 3 areas you believe are holding you back based on your results from your previous practice tests. If you are not sure how to do this, just do a simple accuracy assessment on each major problem type. So what's your accuracy rate in problem solving questions? What's your accuracy rate in reading comp? What's your accuracy rate in critical reasoning? What's your accuracy rate with data sufficiency? And what's your accuracy rate with all the other types in DI? Once you have that, you should be able to rank a top 3. Then do the same thing with longest average time on all those question types. And that should be able to help you situate the balance of accuracy and efficiency that you're going for. So if you have something that's 50% accuracy and 3 minutes average time, that's a pain point. You should probably address that. Now, before your next practice test, what you're going to do with those top 3 areas is you're going to work on the lessons and the practice problems in those areas. And that's exactly the same thing that I recommended doing with your content improvement process. Okay, so repeat the lessons enough that you could teach them to somebody who's not studied for the exam yet, and then do enough practice problems that you're hitting 80% or better accuracy within the allotted time. Okay, and that's going to be 80% of your study time is just focusing on those 3 areas, and the other 20% is going to be reviewing all the other topics that show up on the exam. So you're going to go all in on these top 3 with 80% of your study time, and the other 20% is like review, like I was just talking about, and then working on the other topics on the exam, either with time sets or individual questions, depending on whether you need to grow with timing or content knowledge in those other non-focus areas. Okay, so again, reach out to us if you're not sure how to break that out. That's the simplest way to make sure you're improving your skills between practice exams. And if you truly level up to 80% or better and about 2 minutes average time on those top 3 focus areas before the next test, you should absolutely see the score improve on the next exam. Again, if you've addressed the timing and not missing questions you know how to do, and exam stress and all the other stuff I've talked through here. The last issue that I see people confronting a lot is that you might be using the wrong prep program. It's kind of a situation where like almost everybody, let's say, in the industry means well when they decide they're going to become a GMAT professional. So it's not that they're bad people. It just might not be a fit for you personally. And again, it's not that their platform is like a bad platform or that they're bad people, although there are bad people in the industry. It's not the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people in the industry are good people. It's just that every platform has its own approach, its own strengths and weaknesses. And that just might not be a fit for your personal learning style or your personal timeline. Like some programs want you to spend a year on their platform before you even take a practice exam to measure your progress. And that's awesome if you have 2 years to prepare and you like their teaching style. But it's not so great if you need to get a 100-point gain in the next 3 months. Something to consider. Okay. So I see a lot of people in the industry make posts online like, what's the quote unquote best? Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a good analogy for that, but like there is no best, period. That doesn't exist. There's only the best for you, your specific learning style, budget, and timeline. There will be a best for that, but there's not a quote unquote best. It's just an absurd claim. Anyway, here's how you can take action on this. In general, if you're executing on what your current provider is telling you to do and your score is not improving, then it's time to switch providers because it's there's no hard feelings. It's not like they're bad people or you're a bad student. It's just not a fit. Because if they're telling you to do X and you're doing X and your score's not moving, then it's obviously not working. It doesn't matter why it's not working. It's just clear that it is not working. So just at least do some research on some other options, and feel free to message us if you need help understanding what your best option is given your timeline and your budget. Okay. Now, if you are not executing on the program that you have, then figure out why you're not executing. If it's because you don't like their platform or approach, then you should switch platforms. You're just going to get better results with a platform you naturally resonate with that motivates you to do the work. Having said that, if it's because of something that's more about you and you do believe in their approach and you're just not doing your part to execute on what they're telling you, then take a look at your discipline, your willpower, and your consistency. And I gave you a bunch of recommendations for content that we've made that'll absolutely help with those things. And those are linked below. So those are the main reasons that scores don't go up. If you've worked on all of this and you're still not seeing results, which is very unlikely but possible, definitely reach out to us and we will help you diagnose why it's not working. If you have not worked on all of the 8 things that I just talked you through, then I would recommend going in order. Re-listen to the episode and do a hardcore audit of your timing. Do a hardcore audit of how often you're missing questions you know how to do. It should be 0. Eventually, you should have 0 timing issues. Eventually, you should have 0 questions you knew how to do but got wrong. Now, you might hit your goal score before you arrive at that quote unquote perfect level, but that perfection in those regards should be the goal. And just keep working on each one. Go down the list of 8 things I just talked you through. And as you do, you should absolutely start seeing your score go up. As always, my greatest hope is that this material will make your studies as easy and as painless as they can possibly be. If you want more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the exam, please head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, which is linked in the description of this content, and check out our free video on how to reach your dream score in half the normal time. We specialize in reversing score drops, and we specialize in speed of results. Some of you want that, some of you don't. In the meantime, this is a weekly show, so please subscribe and please stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. Talk to you all soon.